We'll open with a peace chant. Om Vanme Manasi Pratishtita Mano Me Vachi Pratishtitam Aviravir Maheti Vedasya Ma'anishtaha Shrutam Me Ma Prahasi Anena Ditena Oratran Sandadami Ritam Vadishyami Satyam Vadishyami Tanmamavatu Tadvaktaramavatu Avatu Mam Avatu Vaktaram Om Shanti 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 Om. May my speech be one with my mind, and may my mind be one with my speech. O thou self-luminous Brahman, remove the veil of ignorance before me, that I may behold thy light. Do thou reveal to me the spirit of the scriptures. May the truth of the scriptures be ever present to me. May I seek day and night to realize what I learned from the sages. May I speak the truth of Brahman. May I speak the truth. May it protect me. May it protect my teacher. Whom peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So again, we are going to be spotlighting Swami Atulananda with reminiscences from Swami Satwananda and Arkananda, whom I met 1979, and later Swami Arkananda, my last pilgrimage to India in 2014. In 1979, I met Swami Satwananda, whose Maharaj name was Satyan Maharaj, head of the Varanasi Sevashram. He was a disciple of Swami Akhandananda, a skilled manager, a beautiful singer, and a loving, caring soul. He shared his own life's drama with us, which led to his initiation, a great turning point in any aspirant's life. But in his story, we see the marked ascending mental levels in his spiritual development. He began, I met Akhandananda in 1934 and twice in 1935. I just missed Mahapurush Maharaj. My mother had urged me to take initiation, but I had told her the urge must come from within. Nikhilananda, who was the former head of the Ramakrishna Vivekananda Center in New York, was my cousin, and I was with his mother when I saw Akhandananda again. Then one day in my room in Kolkata, as I was seated before the shrine, the thought struck me, life is passing so quickly. I act as though I have achieved something, and I wept. I wrote to Swami Akhandananda at Sargachi. The mail took several days. It was my habit to go to Dakshineshwar at dusk. One night I went to the Panchavati and wept. If he does not wish to initiate me, what will happen to me? Then his letter came. I took the train alone to Sargachi, he said. And when I arrived at the ashrama, I saw Akhandananda. He was seated. His hair was shoulder length. He spoke such sweet words. He asked if I had taken bath, for the day I arrived was the last day of the Jagannath Car Festival. This is an auspicious day, he said. Why not take initiation now? He told me to go to another room and wait. Then I was called. He was seated on an asana. When I had met him before and when I saw him now, he looked very different. I was alone. When I bowed my head, I was nervous. He asked me, what do you want? Is there anything you would like? With these words, something happened, and I wept and wept. He just stroked my back and said, Jai Guru, salutations to the Guru, and I was soothed. Swami Satyananda also shared many intimate and then unknown stories of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. He began, one day Swami Brahmananda severely scolded a monk, Vishuddhananda, who later became the president of the Ramakrishna order in 1962. Vishuddhananda witnessed this and was very upset. So he went to Maharaj when he was smoking his hubble bubble and was in a sweet mood. Maharaj, why did you scold? He asked. If such as you scold, where are we to find refuge? Tomorrow I may do the very same thing as that monk. Maharaj looked at him, then stuck out his tongue, pointing with his thumb to it and then his heart. He shook his head. In other words, what he felt, his love, and what he said through scolding were very different. One was superficial, the other was real. This reminiscence shows the deep mystic relationship between Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Brahmananda, his mind-born son. Shashi Maharaj, Swami Ramakrishnananda, was very strict about serving Sri Ramakrishna's photo during the puja. One day between the puja supply and monastery kitchen supply, there wasn't enough food to offer Maharaj at mealtime. The attendant went to Shashi, who said, what? You make a distinction between Maharaj and Thakur, meaning the master? Give the food to Maharaj first. Then Satyan Maharaj shared two reminiscences that show how the divine play works through the lives of the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. Once in a relaxed mood, he said, Swami Brahmananda was playing cards with Shashi Maharaj, Swami Ramakrishnananda, Vishuddhananda, and one other. Shashi Maharaj was purposely letting Maharaj win. When questioned why he did this, Shashi Maharaj replied, don't you see how childlike and joyful Maharaj becomes when he is winning? Satyan Maharaj explained, with these great souls, everything is done for a reason, but it is difficult for us to understand. Then Satyan Maharaj shared, once Maharaj was encouraged by Shashi Maharaj to come to Bangalore and give a talk. This made Maharaj nervous, so he told him to write out his speech. From that time on, he tried to memorize it. On the train, when he was requested to take tea, he said, no, I don't want tea. I only want to see that speech. But when the time came for him to speak, he didn't need his notes. He spoke in an inspired way. The following reminiscence shows Sri Sarda Devi's purpose and power. Satyan Maharaj explained, once Nag Mahashaya, a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, was discussing the bad character of someone who was frequenting the Udbodhan where Holy Mother was staying. Nag Mahashaya thought this particular person should not come around if there were women there. This eventually reached Holy Mother, who said, what is this? Isn't it my duty to cleanse? If the child is dirty, my job is to clean. During this pilgrimage, Swami Satyananda also shared that for 3 years, he'd served Swami Atulananda in the Mussoorie Hills. Swami Atulananda, known as Guru Das Maharaj, was a Christian-raised monk, a great Advaitin, and a disciple of Sarda Devi. He lived with Swami Turiyananda at Shanti Ashram, which Swami Turiyananda established, the first Eastern-style retreat in America in Northern California under the Vedanta Society of San Francisco, the second Vedanta Society that Swami Vivekananda founded in America. As a young 28-year-old Cornelius Heidsblum, he had first met Swami Vivekananda in New York during his second visit to the United States in the fall of 1899, and also Swami Turiyananda, who was sent to assist Swami Abhedananda in the New York Center. These Swamis inspired Gurudas to live at what was called Lord's Farm, a type of Christian community in New York, as there was no Vedanta ashrama at that time. Gurudas Maharaj gave himself 1 year to read, practice, and master Raja Yoga. By the end of that period, he received an Advaitic experience and was convinced this life is but a dream and that Atman alone is real. Then in 1900 came a letter from Swami Turiyananda, who was to become his beloved teacher, friend, philosopher, and guide, summoning him to Shanti Ashrama. When Swami Turiyananda returned to India in 1902, Gurudas continued to stay at and oversee Shanti Ashrama under Swami Trigunatitananda, the then head of the San Francisco Center. Then in 1906, Gurudasa left for India and stayed there until 1912. He would return to India 2 more times and eventually attained Mahasamadhi there in 1966. What was it like for a Westerner to stay at Bellarmine in those days amongst the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna? Because Gurudas was a foreigner, some sadhus were hesitant to eat with him and share the same plates. Swami Shivananda came to know of this. So one day after food, he was sitting on a long bench in front of the old Mat building, and he called out to Gurudasa. In Gurudasa's own words, I went and stood at a distance. He, Mahapurush Maharaj, asked me to come nearer and made me sit by his side on the bench, putting his hand on my shoulder. No one used to sit on that bench, since it was only meant for the direct disciples. Therefore, all the sadhus standing about could not help but notice this. Mahapurush Maharaj was smoking a hubble bubble. He said, "Do you know I have a frog here? It is my pet frog and is making some noise. Did you know that?" I replied, "No, Maharaj, there is water in it. When you inhale, it will naturally make noise." Saying, "Is it so?" he gave the hookah to me to try, but I could not take it. So Mahapurush Maharaj forcefully put it in my mouth. There was no sound. Then he said, "See, the frog has come to know. That is why it is not making noise now." But when I replied, "No, Maharaj, it will only make that sound when it is inhaled," I was made to inhale. Thereupon he immediately snatched the pipe from my hand and started to inhale. The sadhus who observed this incident immediately realized their mistaken notion about me. Not only that, they came to respect and revere Gurudas Maharaj as a great Vedanta monk. Swami Prabhavananda frequently recalled, when Swami Turiyananda was going to Shanti Ashrama, he told Sister Lalita, Mrs. Carrie Wyckoff, who was one of the Mead sisters, and she was just a young girl at the time Vivekananda visited their home in Pasadena, which is now the Vivekananda House, owned by the Vedanta Society of Southern California. Turiyananda has said, if I have one man realizing God, I will be satisfied. When Sister Lolita asked, do you have such a man? Swami Turiyananda answered, yes, one, meaning Guru Dasa. Swami Prabhavananda always added. Satyan Maharaj continued his reminiscences of Swami Atulananda. Sometimes I cooked for him. He would say, nothing has any value. It is your reaction that gives an object value. If you don't react and accept blame or criticism, then you don't carry that with you. That object has no value. It cannot touch you. Satyan Maharaj then added, he also said, you cannot change others. First, change yourself. Why do you worry about what that person is doing? You have no control over him. You only have control over yourself. Satyan Maharaj then shared the secret of Guru Das Maharaj's extraordinary power of forbearance. He said there was a boy who was Guru Das Maharaj's attendant. He treated him very badly. I asked Maharaj if I could dismiss him. He said no. Later, the boy left the order. In 1964, I came to Missouri and served Guru Das Maharaj, he went on. Once I heard by telegram that he was mistreated badly while he was staying in Kankal. He asked, how did anyone know the door was closed? I begged him to let me dismiss the boy. Guru Das Maharaj said, see that rose on the table? He brought that. Still, I persisted. But then he got very serious and said, this boy has been with me for 4 years. If he cannot change, it is my fault. Satyan Maharaj shared, one day I got excited and Swami Tulananda said, you're taking the unreal for the real. The Swami also related stories of Guru Das Maharaj toward the end of his life. Once we tried to feed Guru Das Maharaj, Swami Satyananda shared with me. He was 96 years old. He said, I don't want to eat. I just want to go to the Ganges to die. I said, you told me not to plan, and now you are planning. Guru Das Maharaj laughed. I met Swami Arkananda at Belar Mat in October 2007. He was a disciple of Swami Virajananda, who received his sannyasa in 1954 from Swami Shankarananda. Senior monks at Belar Mat had suggested I meet this aged monk in Arogya Bhavan, as he'd intimately associated with Swami Atulananda. And at that time, the monks at Belar Mat knew that I had worked on the book with the Swamis in America and India, which included Swami Atulananda's original reminiscences of the great disciples of Sri Ramakrishna that he had met in America. And along with that, at the end part of the book, were letters that were exchanged between Guru Das Maharaj and Ida Ansel Ujjala, who was a disciple of Swami Turiyananda, who also went to stay at Shanti Ashrama when Turiyananda took a band of about 13 Western students out there for sadhana. Swami Arkananda wasted no time sharing his reminiscences. He said Guru Das Maharaj used to meet brahmacharis and sadhus every day after meditating in the temple. But one day a monk came and asked, what has happened to Maharaj? Meaning Guru Das Maharaj. He didn't respond, and he looked very stern. I said, no, He's not that type of man. So I went and asked Guru Das Maharaj, Maharaj, are you unwell? Yes, he said, there's some dullness. Maharaj didn't want to eat, so I suggested he lie down and change his dress. He did, but when I put my hands on his body, I felt a fever. So I called the Kankal Ashram secretary and told him Guru Das Maharaj was not well. Swami Anubhavananda sent Dr. Mitra, a disciple of Holy Mother, who came by in the evening and asked, Maharaj, what happened? I was meditating, Guru Das Maharaj explained, but it was so pleasant for me that I felt I could leave the body. The doctor examined him and found that at that time, the blood had flowed to the head so that at any moment he could go. He immediately prescribed an ice pack for the head and a hot bath, and then instructed us, give him complete rest. He's not to talk to anybody. Guru Das then became all right, Swami Arkananda explained. The meditation had become so deep and so enjoyable that he could have left the body at any time. The body cannot take that type of intense meditation, he explained. So this type of experience comes only to advanced and specially blessed adepts in meditation. We need not worry about such a situation arising in our meditation, but Guru Das Maharaj was such a one. Swami Arkananda continued his reminiscences. When Guru Das Maharaj was at Belar Mat during his first visit to India, Mahapurush Maharaj asked him what Swami Abhedananda in New York had given him as a mantra. Why, that's the Brahmacharya mantra, Mahapurush Maharaj said. So you go to Holy Mother at Udbodhan for initiation. That was in 1911. When he arrived at Udbodhan, Holy Mother said to him, Thakur, the master, used to say, see, your foreign sons will come to you. She used to kiss me by touching my chin and putting her fingers to her lips. Guru Das Maharaj described. So I said, Maharaj, you don't know Bengali, and she didn't know English, but you were talking to each other. How could you understand each other? And how could she understand? He said, that I cannot say. It was from the inside, Atman to Atman. Swami Arkananda continued. Guru Das Maharaj had so much devotion. He had a picture of Thakur on his dresser, and one pin box was there. Before sitting for meditation, he used to touch that box 3 times. What is in that box, I asked. You don't know? That is the dust of Holy Mother's feet. What happened to that box, I asked. Swami Arkananda explained. I had to go away to Vrindavan for treatment. My health had broken down. Then after I went to Belar Mat, he passed away. The Swami continued. Guru Das Maharaj had devotion to the Atman, but he was also a devotee. He always wanted that any devotee who visited him be given prasad. Then he related. One day, he told Swami Turiyananda at Shanti Ashrama, you are giving so much work, I cannot meditate. Swami Triyananda replied, my dear boy, this work is meditation. Every work is worship. If you do work in that way, you will not have to sit for meditation. Automatically, it will come. Work and meditation. Swami Arkananda shared, when it was time for Guru Das Maharaj to receive his sannyas in 1923, Swami Shivananda was president, and he traditionally gave the sannyas vows, and Swami Abhedananda, who had given Guru Das Maharaj Brahmacharya, had gone out. In other words, he had left Velar Math and established another math in Kolkata. But Mahapurush Maharaj called Abhedananda to come and give the sannyas vows. Swami Abhedananda asked, why? You are the president of the order. But Mahapurush Maharaj replied, no, he has received brahmacharya from you, initiation from Holy Mother, and if I give sannyas, there will be 3 gurus. That will be disturbing for him. So since you have given him brahmacharya, you please give him sannyas. So Swami Abhedananda came and gave Guru Das Maharaj sannyas in the old shrine. Mahapurush Maharaj was also present. Swami Arkananda then shared, at the end of Guru Das Maharaj's life, he received visions. The first day was of Christ, and he asked him, can you give me the vision of blood? In other words, of the stigmata. The next day, as he was lying down in his room, he asked someone there, do you know that Swami Vivekananda is standing here? Can you see? No, Maharaj, I cannot see. Pointing, Guru Das Maharaj said, he is standing there, and I can see him. The last day, he had the vision of Holy Mother and Thakur, Sri Ramakrishna, together. First came Christ, then Swamiji, and then Thakur and Mother. This was related to Swami Arkananda by Swami Shushankananda from Ranchi. When I asked Swami Arkananda what he'd learned from his association with Guru Das Maharaj, he replied, his meditative nature, his good heart, and feeling for others, which Swamiji, meaning Vivekananda, most appreciated. Then he said, for sadhu life, he had everything. This was the first and last time I met Swami Arkananda, but he shared a reminiscence of Guru Das Maharaj that Swami Pravrajika often shared with us in the convent, and each time it inspired us. In 1915, Guru Das Maharaj and Swami Pravrajika were both brahmacharis in Mayavati. Guru Das Maharaj was about 45 years old, and Swami Pravrajika was in his early 20s. In Swami Prabhupananda's own words, Guru Das Maharaj wanted me to make a pilgrimage to Kedarnath and Badrinath with him. I gladly agreed. As he was crippled, he had to be carried the entire way in a dandi, a kind of chair carried by 2 people on each side. They stayed at the Kankal Math, then arrived at Hardwar, where they tried unsuccessfully to cook their own food, and an old widow who saw their plight cooked each day for them. So they then hired a cook and a servant to travel with them. They first made the trip to Kedarnath at an altitude of 11,000 feet. Swami Prabhupada related, at Kedarnath, Lord Shiva's temple, there is a wonderful atmosphere. We had no difficulty taking Guru Das Maharaj inside, as he was a Westerner. We had thought the priests might object, but we were told, no, there is no objection here. So we went in and offered our worship. Afterwards, they bathed in a hot and cold springs, which took away all their aches and pains. They then continued on their way to Bodri Narayan, which was filled with adventure. Swami Prabhupada related, one day I went to the river. While I was watching myself, I saw a Swami from another order. Suddenly he slipped and fell into the water. The current of the river was very strong. I threw the end of my wet cloth to him, but before he could grasp it, he was smashed against the rocks and was gone. That was quite a shock for me. Swami continued. We took the path to Badrinarayan, which is at an altitude of 10,000 feet. Guru Das Maharaj was again carried in a dandi. A narrow path led up the mountain. Down below, the river was flowing with a very strong current. I was walking in front, and right behind me was Guru Das Maharaj. All of a sudden, an avalanche came roaring down the mountain. We were all sure we were going to die. I looked back at Guru Das Maharaj. There was a beautiful smile on his face. That gave me such encouragement. The big rocks did not actually touch me, but I could feel the rush of air as they fell just past me. And then, through the Lord's grace, the avalanche suddenly stopped. All the pilgrims sat down and began to chant the Lord's praises. Then we walked again. First, we crossed a bridge. There were big mountains before us. The sun was rising. It was such a beautiful sight. All the pilgrims sat down and closed their eyes. Instead of seeing the beauty outside, they thought of the even greater beauty within and began to meditate. Again, we went on. Finally, we arrived at Badrinarayan. All the pilgrims sat down, waiting for the temple to open. We too were seated to one side. A bright-looking young priest, about 20 to 24 years old, beckoned to me. He said, "Ask your friends to come and follow me." He took us to a side of the temple where it was not crowded. When he opened the temple door, some other pilgrims wanted to enter also, but he told them, "No, it is not for you." The four of us went in with him, and he closed the door behind us. But here is the peculiar thing, the Swami related. Generally, a priest stands to one side or in front, facing the deity. But this priest stood in line with the deity, facing us, which is never done. We stayed and looked and had our darshan. After a few minutes, the priest asked, "Have you had enough darshan?" We came out, but the priest did not leave the temple. He closed the door behind us. Again, we were seated with the pilgrims. Another man beckoned to me, Swami related. "Ask your friends to come with me. The head priest wants to see you." We went, and the head priest, with great courtesy, made us sit by him. He asked in Hindi about Guru Das Maharaj. To what race does this man belong? I knew a little Hindi, Swami Pravrajika said, and I answered, "You have no right to inquire about the race or caste of a monastic." The head priest replied, "I know, but does he not come from America?" He then explained that he himself did not mind, but as Guru Das Maharaj's skin was white, other people would make trouble for him. If they saw him entering the temple, he would have to pay a large sum of money to have it purified. The head priest asked the three of us not to go into the temple either, as we ate with Guru Das Maharaj. But he was very kind to us. Every hour, he would wave the arati lights before the deity and would let us watch from the open temple door. At that time, he would not permit other pilgrims to enter the temple. After we had our darshan, he would allow the other pilgrims to go inside. We never told him or anyone else there that we had already been inside the temple. For 3 days and 3 nights, the four of us were practically guests of the head priest. He arranged for our stay in a heated room and sent us the best temple prasad. There were about 7 or 8 priests at Badrinarayan, and we met them all, but we never saw the young priest again, who had conducted us into the temple when we first arrived. From Bodri Narayan, on the way back to Mayavati, Swami Prabhupada related, Guru Das Maharaj and I stopped at Almora, where Swami Turiyananda was then staying in the Ramakrishna Kutir. We did not know where in Almora the kutir was located. I had begun to call loudly, Swami Turiyanandaji Maharaj, Swami Turiyanandaji Maharaj. It was early in the morning. The Swami had been warming himself by a fire, dressed only in a kopi, a loincloth. As soon as he heard my voice, he came running outside into the cold to meet me. Think of his love. Then he took me by the hand and led me to the kutir, and Guru Das Maharaj also came. He gave us a warm room. We stayed with Swami Turiyananda for 3 days, and we told him the story of our pilgrimage. When he heard about our first darshan at Badri Narayan, when the young priest had taken us inside the temple, he became excited and exclaimed, "You foolish boys, don't you realize that it was the Lord himself who came in this garb and took you inside? Didn't you recognize him?" This is pilgrimage of the heart. Whether to meet spiritual giants, to have the darshan of Mother India, the Himalayas, the Ganges, the forests where the ancient rishis dwelt, or to receive an unexpected, indescribable grace, we must always be open to receive the wisdom and grace that comes from that experience and to draw on that experience throughout our spiritual life. That requires sadhana, preparatory tapasya, and then what Sri Ramakrishna called chewing the cud. To go and sit at the feet of great monks and nuns, draw on their wisdom, soak in the holy atmosphere of Mother India, then assimilate those experiences. That is how they shape us. And in our meditation, we relive those experiences. These stories that we hear become our stories. They become part of our story. And when we relive and dwell in these stories, that is how they transform our life.